Gen Z, many graduating this weekend, in the next couple of weeks from area universities, maybe moving on from high school, going to college. Have they lost the ability to manage basic adulthood? A new study suggests that, yes, they have. And if you have kids who are Gen Zers, that would be the age of 12 to 27. But we're really talking about the adults, 20, 21, and up to 27. Have they lost that ability? Well, studies would suggest, yes, they have. And who's to blame? Is it the kids themselves, or is it the adults? To me, it's always the latter, because kids are vulnerable. They don't know any better. They know the environments that they find themselves in. They can only react and deal with the environments that adults allow them in large part to be in. And when you look at some of these numbers, this story was written in the Telegraph, and you see how bad it is right now for Gen Z. I don't know how you get this generation back. I mean, I think you can, but man, it's going to take some time, because remember, they dealt with COVID. They were locked down during critical learning years. They had their growth stunted emotionally in the classroom and elsewhere. And now they apparently don't know how to handle adulthood. And I don't say this as like, get off my lawn. I say that as somebody who, is a millennial with little kids. But it's something I think about a lot. And I got to imagine many of you parents, fellow parents, think about this quite a bit as well. But when you see numbers like this, when you see that according to data recently released, a third of all men under the age of 35 are still living with their parents. And for women, that number is less than a quarter. So it's a crisis, I would say, for both sexes. Yeah, there's two. Sorry to break it to you. I know that's a
talk about a bombshell.
Surprise to some of you, but yes, there are two genders. I know. When you've got a third of men under 35, not 25, not like, hey, we're hanging around moms and dads a little bit after school and, trying to figure out life. 35-year-old men living in their parents' houses. Now, I know it happens. People fall on tough times. They temporarily will shack up with a friend or with, a family member, maybe a parent, get back on your feet. But in large part, these are people who never left, right? These are people who never got out on their own, never paid a bill. How many people do you know in their late 20s who are still on their parents' cell phone bills, for crying out loud? And it's always under the excuse of, well, it's cheaper to keep them on the plan, and, maybe they pay us a few bucks a month for it. Like, that's rampant. I hear about that all the time. But when you have figures like this, you wonder why the birth rate's in the toilet, by the way. You wonder in part why the birth rate is at a century low, 1.62, well below the replacement rate of 2.1. Well, it's kind of hard to, have kids and, find someone you love and sleep with them and create future babies when you're living in mom's basement. All right? Talking to your hand all day. And it's kind of a tough way to grow up and be an adult. And it is a crisis that we're dealing with right now. And I don't think it's as easy to sit there and say, well, the rents are really high. It's tough to find a good job. Got a lot of student loans out there. You got to let them get out. You got to let them in part sink or swim. Because you did it, right? If you're a boomer, Gen Xer, millennial, you did it, we did it. And part of the reason we did it is because we were forced to do it. There was no other option. It wasn't like hang around moms and dads till you're 25, till you're 30 years old. It's like, what are you doing? Figure out what you want to do, pursue it, chase it, get a job, and go live, go be in the real world. But for too many, it seems like we've got to coddle. We've got to protect. And I've always thought to myself, and, I know my kids are young, but man, I am hoping like heck that I will be putting my money where my mouth is as they get older. You have to let them, it seems like to me, fail. Failure is how you learn. Failure is how we've all learned. Failure is how they're going to learn. Instead, by creating these, perceived safe spaces where you do things at your own pace and you never fail and you never fall on your face, what does that really get you? it just creates you into a stunted, emotionally small individual. And that's what I think we're seeing a lot of right now. And you stack that on top of the COVID stuff that these kids had to deal with, and it's just absolutely brutal. So this article here in The Telegraph goes on the note here, titled Gen Z Has Lost the Ability to Manage Basic Adulthood. It says, do you still have teenagers? Do you have a teenage daughter who freezes in horror if her phone rings? Is your son still living under your roof at age 32? Do your student offspring now have so many unread emails clogging their inbox they've decided to abandon it? Well, if so, congrats. Your brood of overgrown babies are perfectly normal by today's standards. And, I'm reading through some of the details here of this, and it talks about the ages of people. It talks about, who's still living at home, who's not, what needs to happen for the, 18 to 27-year-old to feel like they're getting back into society and becoming a part of society. And it's like, we just got to throw these kids to the wolves a little bit because they never had it done to them. They got emotionally stunted by COVID, and now they find themselves in a position where they're getting out into the real world a little bit, and they can't handle it. And they can't handle the criticism. They can't handle the idea of failure. They're afraid of failure. Right now, Claire's playing soccer, and, they're wrapping up their first year of soccer next year. She's 5, and they're not keeping score in the league, and I'm fine with that, whatever. But, the kids know. They're not dumb. They know if they won. They know if they lost. But Claire has asked me a couple of times, going to a game, well, Dad, what if we lose? What if we lose? And I'm like, well, technically no one's keeping score. But if you lose, it'll make you practice harder. It'll make you want to be better. It'll make you want to improve. I'm like, don't be afraid of it. It's not a bad thing to lose. You have to lose. You won't get better at anything if you don't lose. And it seems like just that in and of itself is lost. I mean, I'm not afraid to try a segment on this show that might totally bomb out. John and Mark and I have talked about it, and sometimes it's just a colossal failure, and we fall flat on our faces, and it happens. But guess what? We're doing what? We're doing 80 segments a week on this show. I'm not going 80 for 80. I'd like to, but, I'll be the first one to tell you. I'm not going 80 for 80 on segments on this show in a week. Somebody tell me I do. But I don't. I know I don't.
You do.
Oh, thank you very
Most
much.
weeks.
That very much.
Such a nice man.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Thanks for the ego boost. I know that doesn't happen here. But you take some chances. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But you can't be afraid of it. You can't be afraid of taking a chance. Because if you're afraid of taking a chance, you're not going to get better. And for too many, it seems like they're afraid of it. And I just want to get our young people out there and get them in the real world and have them fall flat on their face, John, because we all have examples of falling flat on our face, and it works out beautifully for us.
Yeah, it's a little easier to learn to ride that bike at 4, 5, or 6 than it is at 12 or 13 or 14 when you fall to the ground.
That is a great example, too.
I think some of it, part of, too, is the syndrome of the helicopter parent
Yes.
thing, too, because you do have to, you learn these lessons when you fail. They're life lessons. Life's tough. Get a helmet. Get back up.
Mm-hmm.
You're fine.
You'll be okay. That's right. I totally agree with that. I'm trying to get Claire on the bike right now. And some days she likes it. Some days she, not as big a fan. But we're working on those training wheels. And eventually they'll come off. But for too many, seems like they got 25-year-old kids on training wheels. And, man, it's got to end.
Touche.
It's got to end fast. Because if not, we're screwed as a society and a country.